Hello and welcome to the Cubs on Deck podcast. I am one of your hosts. My name is Greg Huss, and today I am joined by my co-host Bryan Smith. Bryan, it's feeling like spring has sprung. We got some spring training action. How you feeling over there?
Oh man, isn't it so nice to have games again? I mean, today we had 2 Cubs games. That was awesome.
Yeah, that's it. It's kind of it surprised me how quick it came up. I'm loving it. I feel like
Yep.
the players are every single year that's getting where it's like, oh, the players are reporting, and then it's like 5 days later and they're playing games, and it's just a wild concept to me every single year. But I love it. I love that we're seeing major league players play. I love that we're seeing prospects. I love like the early spring training games, especially because we get to see the prospects playing in major league spring training games. And I love that.
The nice thing is with the World Baseball Classic this year too, I think a lot of the major league players are more ready than they usually are. And then the Cubs now do a prospect camp that sort of butts up against spring training, so the prospects are a lot more ready, I think, than they would have been in the past on, February 27th. So it's a nice mix. I mean, Cubs had a lot of guys throw like 97, 98 today, which just goes to show like if that's happening now, I mean, we're in good shape for these guys to be at the top of their game right out of the chute.
Spring training is just like it's so much different than it was 10 years ago, and
Yep.
it's not even the same sport almost from like what 30 years ago or so, 40 years ago. Like
Yep.
it's wild how much spring training has changed because there's guys throwing like basically like they're hitting mid 90s with their fastball, but like that's where they're going to be when the season ramps up too. It's like they might add a couple extra ticks, but like they're basically coming to camp like ready to rock and roll, which is crazy.
Yeah, the Cubs had a prospect named Michael Arias, who's probably going to be in low A this year, who I think posted a video of himself on Instagram hitting 100 miles per hour. And somebody asked me, they were like, why is he wasting bullets throwing 100 miles per hour in January? And I think that's really one of the huge things that's changed in baseball in the last couple of years, even, is that professional baseball, has really become a 12-month-a-year sport. And I think teams are okay with the idea of, maybe a guy only gets 40 innings in during the regular season because they're babying him, but they know that they're going to get another, 15 to 25 sort of simulated innings out of the guy anywhere between September instructs, the mini camps, spring training, all that. Like that's all watched and scrutinized so much more than it was.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's crazy, and I'm really just excited to be able to talk about these prospects, like you said,
Yep.
in camp here. So this episode, we got a few different topics we want to hit on as we prepare for the season to get into full swing. I'll spoiler alert for this episode. Actually, Bryan and I are recording this the night before this episode drops. Coming up soon, as of right now, we are now on a schedule of episodes are going to be dropping every single week, which is fun. And the reason why that's starting up now is, well, one, because spring training is here, but two, because I'm going to have the broadcasters for the affiliates come on the show, and we're going to do some previews of the affiliates for this season throughout the month of March so that we are ready come the end of March, early April for the season to actually be here. So we're going to start off with Alex Cohen previewing the AAA Iowa Cubs season for the next episode here. But
How about Alex Cohen, by the way, gets a shot on the score doing a radio big league game this weekend? That was awesome.
yeah, I had that originally on our note sheet. I'm glad that you brought that up. It's fun to, I mean, for me and you, it's fun to hear Alex on the call because Alex does such a great job on
Yep.
Iowa Cubs calls every single night, every single day, and to get that experience calling big league spring training games is like got to be amazing for him. I know he was having the time of his life out there, and he did a great job calling with Ron Coomer.
Yeah, I mean, Boog is one of those like broadcasters that has to leave the Cubs a decent amount for his other job with ESPN. I would love for the Cubs to find a way to get Alex into a big league game on marquee this year. Appeal to anyone who listens that has power. Please get Alex in there.
Yeah, exactly. I'll hype him up next episode too. But so as far as this episode goes, three main topics of discussion that we want to hit on. One is the prospects playing in games. We want to highlight a few of those guys, and then we'll get into some pitch clock thoughts because obviously we're seeing the pitch clock in major league games in spring training right now. Bryan, you and I have had experience watching the pitch clock in past seasons in the minor leagues. Just kind of want to put our 2 cents in on that, and then we're going to end the episode here with some Big Brother talk. So we'll get into more details later, but kind of pairing major league players with minor league players, see how that works. So we have 8 different combinations that we want to talk about at the tail end of this episode. But We'll get to that later. Right now, we want to talk first about the prospects in big league camp. And I think it would be embarrassing on our part to start with anyone other than PCA, right? Like I think that seeing him in big league spring, watching him show off the cannon in the outfield, holding his own at the plate, like it's fun to see PCA playing with the big leaguers because it might be something we see towards the end of this year.
Yeah, I mean, Dexter Fowler was in the booth this weekend, and he was talking about, his interactions with Pete, and Boog has talked about it a little bit. Seems like they're sort of really throwing him into camp and sort of like integrating him with the big league team so that, whenever that opportunity happens, like he's not going to be unfamiliar with the staff. They're not going to be unfamiliar with him. And, I think it's already clear. I mean, the behind the back catches that we've seen on social media already. I mean, he's like his personality shines through even with all those other big leaguers in camp. It's awesome that he's not sort of like, overwhelmed by it. I think it's just going to bring out the best in him. Yeah,
we're going to talk about the pairings of major leaguers and minor leaguers later on. And this combo was on my short list. I cut it because I figured we talk about it right now. Every picture I've seen, not every picture, but damn near every picture I've seen has been PCA standing or sitting with Cody Bellinger, which is awesome to see those two constantly working together. I think that the Cubs just said, PCA, like kind of throwing you into this big league spring, enjoy it, like work your butt off, but also just spend a whole lot of time with Cody Bellinger, who is a former top prospect, former like a big time name. Get some experience with him, and I think that's working. I think that has a good way of working itself out, I guess, is the better way to describe it. So, and the I know you had some comments. You tweeted something about PCA showing off that cannon out in center field, throwing out a runner at second base.
Yeah, I mean, he showed on Instagram all winter how much work he was doing to get stronger, and even Dex joked in the in the booth that he made a joke to Pete that he hadn't seen him with his shirt on before after following him on Instagram. Pete was showing off the guns and the pecs as much as he could this winter. But I think it's really actually manifested on the field. Like, we'll see if it shows up with more power this year. I don't think the Cubs are even really pushing that. So I don't, maybe it doesn't. But I think it did show up a little bit with arm strength. He had a throw in the first game. It didn't really matter. It was just sort of a guy on second, pretending to tag up, and Pete caught it and threw it to third. And it was a really strong throw. And I kind of made a mental note of it. Like, I don't remember his throws to third being that strong last year. And then he had the assist the next day. So it's a nice thing to see an extra sort of skill popping already.
Yeah, there's one other position player I want to talk about, and that's another center fielder in Darius Hill, who came in and he does what he does, right? He comes in and hits. And the reason why I want to touch on Darius Hill is not because he went in and he came into these spring training games and got some hits. It's more the fact that, like, this seems extraordinarily important for him to come in and get hits in the spring training. Like showing that he can come in earlier in games, not necessarily in the 7th, 8th, and 9th innings where he's facing other minor leaguers, but in the middle innings when he's still facing some big league bullpen arms, maybe some starting pitchers, and prove that he can hit big league talent. Because I think that's where he's at. Development wise, is he needs to do that. And I think that we're going to see that in Chicago this year in some capacity. And he needs to continue to prove that his role as a fourth outfielder is legit. And that he can absolutely be that come this year, come next year,
And the thing I love about Darius is like the day-to-day consistency that he brings to the field. And so it's just like, it's so perfect that he's played in 3 big league games so far. He has a hit in all of them. It's like it, and they're like Darius hits too. One is like between first base and second base, like a hard hit grounder. One is sort of that like left center field sort of squib, hit.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I don't know if you've seen him play yet, but he looks stronger to me. I mean, I saw him standing. They had a shot from center field of the outfielders just standing around talking, and he looked so much bigger than PCA. He just sort of shoulders, like even how tall he was, it really stuck out to me. So, I'm excited to see if there's a little more physicality to the game this year, because if he adds that, he's a big leaguer for sure.
We've talked about how Darius Hill just kind of needs to he's already kind of advantageous at attacking mistake breakers or fastballs left, right down the middle. But he needs to be able to punish each of those. And I think that him getting bigger helps tremendously with that. Is there a starting pitcher that made the big leagues that is still a prospect that you want to talk about first?
Yeah, I mean, I think Caleb Kilian is going to probably be the story that's like talked about tomorrow coming out of the 2 games today, just because, he pitched 2 really smooth innings. I think it was 20 strikes out of 29 pitches, which is probably the, biggest takeaway. The thing that stuck out to me, I tweeted about it. People can go look up the specifics, but Marquis posted a video of just 3 pitches he threw, and it was so obvious to me that there was, his hand is sort of behind the ball more. That's something that coaches will talk about sometimes than I remember it being in the past. Sometimes in the past, he'd get a little on the side of the ball. And a thing that can really help with is you can end up getting more life on your fastball if you do that well. Jeremiah Estrada, that's like, when you ask coaches, why is that fastball so special? It's because he's incredible at staying behind the ball. And Kilian posted some numbers today that his fastball had more ride today than it did in any of his major league games last year. So if you add, throwing strikes at a 60 to 70% clip and a little more stuff, I mean, that guy could so quickly be who we thought he was in 2021, and even better because the stuff has gotten better since then. Like, it could be just a blink of an eye and we're right back there.
Yeah, that's super interesting, right? That we were so high on him going into 2022 because we saw what he did command and control wise in 2021. And then he kind of showed that tick of like new stuff. It wasn't necessarily nasty, but like we knew that he had that new spike curve, and we knew that like he had the changeup that he'd been working on. Like he had the new stuff. Yep. And then last year, obviously the command and control completely escaped him, but he was popping high 90s on occasion in AAA Iowa. And then he was still showing like decent stuff. Alex Cohen was talking like every single outing. I remember every single outing that Caleb Kilian had in AAA last year. Alex would point out the fact that his stuff looked good. Like it was really good stuff. He just couldn't locate it anywhere. So you're right. Like it's an interesting dynamic in entering this 2023 season with him, because the stuff is better than we thought it was going into 2022. There's just this added element of like, can he command it, which we didn't have going into 2022. So it's exciting. At the very least, it's exciting to see him do this and like you said, look physically different doing it in one spring training game. Now, granted, it's one spring training game, but like when you're looking at like how he physically looks different, how he's staying behind the ball, you described that really, really, really well. That is something you can kind of take away from one game. Like results, you can't take away. You can't take away the results from one game necessarily, but the way in which he did it, you can take away.
And our buddy Ryan Herrera over at CHGO, I talked to him, I know, a couple days ago, and he talked to Ryan about, they kind of diagnosed what in his lower half was wrong, which was basically that his front leg was sort of opening his body up when he threw. He had done a better job of sort of staying closed as long as he could in the 2021 season. And they sort of found that. They've been working on that too. So I think there's a lot of things that they've sort of figured out. And, obviously there's going to also be some sort of mental block. Like when Caleb gets to the majors, there is going to, he is going to have to fight a little bit of that, I'm sure. There's going to be that voice in his head saying like, remember what this was like last time, and a little self-doubt. If he pushes through that, man, I think he could be one of those things that actually sort of adds wins to the win-loss column this year. If that type of guy breaks out, there's probably 4 to 6 names we could pick out that you say, if that guy breaks out, maybe this team wins 2 more games, 3 more games than they would have if they didn't break out.
Yeah, he's a really good example of a guy that like can really impact the big league team that we've kind of written off to a certain degree because of his results last year. Final line from Caleb Kilian on today is Monday. Sorry. Whew, it's on Monday was 2 innings pitched, 0 hits, 0 runs, 0 walks, 2 strikeouts. So a really good outing. I want to transition to another guy who threw 2 innings, and that was Ryan Jensen, who put up 2 innings. He did give up 2 hits and walked 2 guys, but he struck out 3, and really the stuff looked pretty good. I actually have one of your tweets pulled up here. If you don't mind me reading it, then I'll kick it over to you. The fastball, the four-seam fastball was sitting in the mid-90s up to 98 miles. Well, really, if you're rounding up to 99 miles an hour with the four-seam fastball. He rocked a cutter and then a few mid-90s, or sorry, not mid-90s. That's Daniel Palencia. Mid-80s sliders from Ryan Jensen today. And I'm really excited about Ryan Jensen, man. I'm really excited to see what the changes he made over the offseason, what the Cubs have in mind for him entering this season. Reliever, starter, AAA, AA. Can he make the big leagues? There's just a lot of question marks about Ryan Jensen, and like every time, I feel like every time he goes out there, whether it's spring or during the season, I'm just gonna be like really excited to see what he puts out there.
Yeah, I mean, if you throw in the second inning, he worked too. He threw 6 different pitches today, and I mean, that's a guy coming out of college that it was really like one really plus pitch, and then everything else was sort of like you'd see it every once in a while. But I think now he has a bunch of offerings that the Cubs feel good about, that the stuff grade is real high. And now it's just about finding that right mix. And I think the big pitch for him is going to be that cutter. He threw it a bunch today. I think what that cutter allows him to do is to sort of be an east-west pitcher, because his sinker has always been just sort of straight arm side run. I mean, that thing just bolts to the right, if you're watching from the center field camera. And now if you add in that cutter that's going the opposite direction, I mean, you really put doubt in the hitter's mind on, which side of the plate they're looking on a pitch that looks the same coming out of his hand.
Yeah. Are there any other players that you wanted to point out from these spring training outings so far? I know that we could probably go and critique and comment on every single pitch and every single swing taken so far, but is there anybody else you wanted to point out?
I mean, Cam Sanders looked really good today. I know that he's far from a prospect, but I think we'd be remiss if we were talking spring training results. Future Iowa Cub David Bodie has been just absolutely incredible. So like that would be a really fun story if that guy goes to Iowa, spends 2-3 months just crushing it. I'm sure he'll be a Des Moines absolute favorite. I'm sure the fans there will love him, and if he's really good to those fans, that'll be a really good relationship. And then like, man, that guy works his way back to Chicago and hits a big home run the first week after he's called up from Iowa. Like that's the kind of thing we love about baseball. So, I love that David's in camp fighting again.
Yeah, David Bodie hitting big home runs. I've never heard of that one before.
Yep.
All right, let's go ahead and transition to some pitch clock talk, because that has been the thing that has been talked about so far in spring training.
That's all they talk about.
Oh my God. Like in terms of whether you're listening to the broadcast, whether you're on Twitter and seeing people make comments all day, every day. I think that I want to start off this pitch clock talk with one very specific video that got posted on Twitter. And because it was I believe it was the very first at bat with this major league pitch clock. And it was, I don't know who the pitcher was for the Padres, but it was someone pitching for the Padres, the very first spring training game. And this is the video that happened to go viral. Of course it did, because it was the first time. And the pitcher for the Padres was working exceptionally fast. You could tell, I think with the big leaguers, you're going to see that a lot throughout the spring training, is they're working way faster than what the pitch clock is allowing them, because they want to be sure that they're good come regular season. So this particular video, the pitcher they showed the entire at bat, and the pitcher for the Padres was working, and he was throwing the pitch at 12 seconds still in the pitch clock, like between 9 and 12 seconds still in the pitch clock. There was still a lot of time left there, and fans were viewing that video and saying, "Oh, this is too fast. Like I can't watch this. This is not what I signed up for. I wanted the pitch clock, but this is not what I signed up for." And that immediately I was like, "Oh no, like bad first impression. I don't like that," because he still had the full 10 seconds still to be able to throw the pitch. And I think that my big takeaway, the big thing that I want to say, and I'll kick it to you, is that this does not, like, that was way more noticeable than, and the big thing is how much you notice the pitch clock. That was way more noticeable than what we had experience in watching the minor leagues this past year. It was noticeable in the fact that the games were moving faster. But if you're sitting there watching pitch to pitch, I didn't notice it all that much last year. I don't know how you felt, but like I was kind of like, all right, he's throwing another pitch. He's throwing another. What affected me the most was when what affected me the most was when I would go back on MiLB TV and I would always like rewind in like the 15-second intervals that my phone allowed me to. And it used to be where I could rewind or fast forward in 15-second intervals and be perfectly fine. Now I can't do that anymore. But like, I don't know, man. It's not something that's super noticeable in my experience watching it last year. I don't know how you felt.
Yeah, it was too bad that the takeaway from the weekend wasn't so much I think it was 23 minutes a game on average that got shaved from the pitch clock. It was more like, people didn't like that the clock was right behind the pitcher that they could see on the broadcast and it was in their face so much. It was like the at-bat you mentioned. It was the game that ended on a pitch clock violation. Like that stuff got so much of the attention out of the gate instead of sort of the headline, which is, hey, the rule worked. And, these games are moving faster. I mean, the Cubs played a game today in 2 hours and 4 minutes, and it was a game that had 15 different pitchers in it. So, I know that not everybody wants a game that's that fast. I think a thing that we see in our Twitter mentions a lot is like, why is baseball trying to give baseball fans less baseball? Like, that's a take that I don't really see because there isn't any less baseball happening. The thing that's being cut out is the breaks between pitches. And, I think if you want to go to Wrigley Field and get your money's worth on spending a lot of time there, like that opportunity is still going to be there. The gates are going to open early enough for you to have fun. You're going to be able to stay after, you're going to be able to be there for 6 hours if you want to be. They're going to pour enough cold beer for you to leave a happy fan. But I think the game moving, I've gotten a lot of texts from friends that have been out on baseball for a lot of years. They're like really interested in how this is going to change things. And I don't know. My experience last year was that it was really good, but also like when you're in it and the players are just like sort of not making a big show of it when they get a violation called them, like it becomes normal really quick. These guys are going to get used to it and it's going to just seem second nature within like 2 months. So
yeah, the first couple months, you're right. The first couple months will be a little rough. There's going to be players arguing. It's going to look not entirely dissimilar to when they were checking for substances on pitchers' hands and they were taking their pants off in front of the umpires and stuff like that. I think there's going to be a lot of arguments there early on. And then the guys will get used to it. That's what happened in the minor leagues. The guys got used to it. They became more comfortable with the situation. It's going to be just fine. My biggest issue with the pitch clock so far is something that I was not expecting even remotely. It was the fact that actually I didn't get the chance to watch the game on TV these past couple days. I only watched it for part of the game on Saturday. I was listening on the radio. That the pitch clock was on the score bug. Was it still on the score bug on Sunday and Monday?
Yeah, I believe they might have changed it to just pop in when it gets to 10. Okay. But yeah, it's still on there.
See, and that's my biggest problem is it doesn't come into play that often. We're like,
the shot clock.
It shows the shot clock, like the shot clock in basketball. There's shot clock violations however many times in a basketball game. And more than that, there's times where the shot clock affects a shot in basketball.
Yep.
In baseball, this pitch clock is affecting a game. In the minor leagues, it was affecting it fewer than one time per game. And so the fact that we have a pitch clock on the score bug just draws my attention to that when we don't need to. We can be perfectly fine with no score bug pitch clock, and I wouldn't even notice a difference. But the fact now our attention is drawn to that, and it drives me crazy. But what
drove me crazy was that game, that Red Sox game that ended with the violation. Yeah. The thing that you read a bunch was like people being like, "Could you imagine the World Series ending on that?" And I want to be like, come on, like, don't we know enough about human nature? Like, the umps aren't going to call a violation on a hitter in a World Series game for not being ready with 8 seconds to go on the pitch clock. Yeah. Like, right now, this happens in football every year. They come up with a couple rules that they say, hey, we're going to enforce heavily this year. It seems so weird in preseason when they're calling it a bunch. And then it's like, it just sort of levels out to a natural point. Like, I think the pitch clock will be a little more punitive than that. But if it's close, the players are going to get the benefit of the doubt in October and, honestly, probably in June too.
Yeah. I think you're more likely to see a umpire calling time himself when the clock's running down than to see him call a delay of game or whatever, or the violation, I guess, I don't know. You have any other thoughts on that? I just wanted to, I thought it was worthwhile for us to chat a little bit about that, just given the fact that we've seen the pitch clock in use longer than some people. And honestly, the people listening to this podcast too have been watching minor league baseball, so they're more familiar with it too. But I just thought it was worthwhile for us to kind of mention it.
Totally. You guys are going to like it in the long run, I promise.
Yeah. All right, man, let's go ahead and transition into this kind of Big Brother Day idea that you had. So we were trying to put together an episode recently, and you referenced to me an article that you wrote over at Bleacher Nation back in 2019.
Yes.
Where you put together, what was it? 11 different combinations of major leaguer and minor leaguer, and then you put more than your standard. You described 11, I think, and then you put several more pairings. And I guess I'll kick it to you to describe like your thought process behind this and describe what we're getting ready to do.
Yeah, the article is almost more of a theory than like using specific players, which is just or an idea, I guess, that a fun thing that I think major league teams should do. I actually, I heard from a couple scouts actually after this, like, hey, I love that idea, and is that I think that, to make an if the Cubs are always going to talk about how they're an organization and they'd say that's Cub and stuff, like, I think a way to do that is to make the minor leaguers and the major leaguers feel more cohesive. And so one of my ideas for that was that the Cubs should have a day, and just blow it out and just say, like, we're going to have a day where we're going to pair one minor leaguer with one major leaguer. And, I'm sure they could do all sorts of fun stuff with it. Like you could do live ABs at the end of the day, and the guys that perform the best, like, get some sort of prize. Or, you could encourage the major leaguers to, do things for their minor leaguers on that day. Maybe they buy them like the nicest lunch they're going to have all spring, or, so stuff like that. But really, I think it would be an opportunity for some of the minor league guys that maybe aren't on the 40-man roster, that aren't sort of seeing the major league part of the complex so much. Like, show them what a major leaguer that's sort of similar to them, how he goes about his business, how he, what he focuses on when he's doing batting practice, how he's thinking about, maybe his bullpen day or something like that. If you're a pitcher, like, bridge the gap a little bit between the A ballers and the major leaguers. And I think you'd see guys get inspired that are in the minor leagues at, like, okay, this guy sort of does look like he throws the same pitches as me. We're the same body type, and he's succeeding at the major level. Like, when you inspire that belief, I'm a big believer that can go a long way. And it's sort of a silly idea, but I do think that teams should do it. So I'll argue passionately behind it anyway.
I think that I don't know where you started off with when you were writing this article, but I think may have started off as like kind of a silly idea, like a fun idea, and then it's like kind of morphed into like, hey, this is actually like this is kind of legit. Like I think that it actually absolutely like would benefit the minor league players, and it might like have some benefit to the major league players on basically identifying who they are as players and kind of relaying that message down to the minor leaguers. So we'll go ahead and start off, and I'm going to let you kick off with a combination of a catching combination here.
Yeah, so when I was thinking about pairing a prospect with a major leaguer this year, for some reason, the first one that popped in my head, I wanted to go with new Cubs. That's going to be a theme of some of my picks, because it's just fun to sort of think about, these new guys and sort of what defines them as players. So one of the guys that popped in my head was Tucker Barnhart, who, to me, if I think about Tucker, it's like he's the ultimate sort of, either sort of backup catcher or like, sort of 40-50% catcher. But he's a guy that the pitchers love for him to call games. He was a switch hitter. He's now not switch hitting anymore. So he's sort of played with both sides of the plate. He's very thoughtful. David Ross talked today about, how he'd watched all videos on every pitcher before they even, got particularly far in that process. And so when I was trying to think of a guy to pair with Tucker, it's the most like obvious connection is Casey Opitz, who was a Cubs pick 2 years ago, who, was sold when the Cubs drafted him as like, this is a guy pitchers love to throw to. Didn't Jordan Wicks tell us that it was his favorite guy to throw to? Mm-hmm. And Casey is sort of a similar offensive profile as Tucker. Like he's not gonna crush it, but put those guys in a room to talk about what they look for in planning, how to call a game ahead of time, and then also like for Tucker to talk to Casey about like this is what you have to do to hit enough to last in the majors, because that's the big thing I think for guys of that player type. And like I think there's probably some little things that Tucker's picked up along the way that like you give that to Casey. Casey keeps on his development path. Like, I feel like he's so close to being the type of guy that has the career that Tucker's had. So I'd love to, hear what those guys in a room would sound like.
Yeah, I'd love to put those two in a room with pitchers watching like a video feed of what they're saying, and like the pitchers would be like learning so much along the way too. I think that's super interesting, because I think you could pair Tucker Barnhart with a few different catchers in the minor league system right now.
Totally.
I mean, because the way that like the post Wilson Contreras catching setup for the Cubs is going this route of Tucker Barnhart, Yan Gomes, and then we've talked about on this podcast, I think with you and with Greg and with multiple times, is that like the Cubs system is littered with guys like Tucker Barnhart and Yan Gomes. I think that you could have said, I mean, I think Tucker Barnhart and Casey Opitz is particularly perfect. But you could have said Pablo Allende, you could have said Ethan Hearn, you could have said Bryce Wyndham. Like there are several guys you could have said in that situation.
Oh, and Bryce is in big league camp this year. He got an invite. I guarantee you he's picking Tucker's brain. Like there's no doubt about it.
For sure. All right, I'm gonna go with my first one. I'm gonna go a little bit off the beaten path in terms of like you're kind of mentioning like lower level guys. I'm gonna go Ian Happ and Chase Strumpf, which Strumpf is in big league camp now, so that doesn't really fit the mold all that much. But I think there are so many similarities between these two, between Happ and Strumpf, that it felt too perfect to pass up on this opportunity. I'm hoping that Strumpf is taking advantage of that this spring. My thinking is they're both former top two round picks, right? Happ being a first rounder, Chase Strumpf being a second rounder. Both coming out of college, both coming out of like bigger colleges. And both were drafted as second basemen with good hit tools. They were both drafted with good hit tools at second baseman, but both second basemen that weren't really like known for their defense. Obviously, Ian Happ transitioned off that, is now a Gold Glove left fielder. Chase Strumpf is still playing some second base, playing some third base, but looking better doing so. And then both guys with the bat kind of transitioned from that hit tool they were drafted with to, okay, now we're swinging and missing a whole lot, trying to hit for a whole lot more power. And then now the goal with Ian Happ last year was, let's bring back that contact ability, drop some of the power. And I think that we're hoping to see that a little bit more with Chase Strumpf, where he's bringing the contact back into the mix. So I feel like these guys, their development path is kind of in parallel in a lot of different ways. I would love to hear what Ian Happ has to say to Strumpf about how to tap back into those good bat to ball skills that they originally had. And I think also to have Ian Happ kind of guide Strumpf on how to like the mindset defensively. Even though Strumpf might not be a left fielder in the big leagues, he might still be a second baseman or a third baseman, maybe the first baseman. But it's like that mindset of like, okay, am I a second baseman? Am I not a second baseman? There's a whole lot of like mental gymnastics that goes through all that. So I don't know. I just thought that those two, their development path lined up strangely similar.
Yeah, I didn't even see it right away as close, but you're dead on. And actually, one thing I think that really has defined Ian's career is he really had to give up, like, I'll play anywhere that gets me in the lineup. And then, he figured out a way. He sort of worked his way down to left field, and then he figures out a way to thrive there and, becomes a Gold Glover, has his best offensive season. So, like, sort of like allowing your ego to not get in the way of just like, give me a lineup spot and I'm good. I don't care where it is.
Yeah, exactly. All right. You want to go to the pitching route here?
Sure. Yeah. So like I mentioned, I wanted to start with some free agents. So I wanted to find someone for Jameson Taillon, and there's the Cubs system right now is just full of big horses. So you could go, that's sort of what defines Jameson to me, is just that big body, like a guy that kind of came up as a power pitcher that has sort of like also sort of backed his way into, he's now, I mean, his walk rate, I think, is probably the best on the team. And, throws 4 pitches, has evolved a ton, has added a ton of weight over the years. When he came up, he was pretty skinny. Now he's, totally filled out guy. So when I thought about all that, I was like, man, Cole Franklin and him would be a really interesting pairing. They're not like the most similar body types now. Cole is still, really skinny. Their games are not particularly close, where like Jameson is now succeeding more on command. Cole is, Cole's stuff really popped last year, and I think he's sort of figuring out again how to make it work. So I think that conversation would be really interesting, because Jameson got on the other side of that. He was just the stuff guy, and he figured out how to be the other thing. And if Cole could even get a little bit of that, I think, it would be so fast how quick he would pop up to the majors. He's got the stuff for it. And, these are 2 guys that right now are both learning how to throw sweeper sliders. So, why don't we let the 2 6'4" righties just learn the sweeper together?
I love how this is just one big exercise to like kind of make comps, but not really. Like,
exactly. It really is.
Like I feel like that's what we do on a daily basis, is like, hey, like this reminds me, like this player reminds me of this player, but I'm not going to say like I'm comping him to, it's that's what we do on a daily basis. So that's,
but you know what? That's what the minor leaguers do too. If you talk to them, like, they'll see themselves in big leaguers all the time. And, they have that self-belief as sort of what has gotten them to this level. And they'll see some, like when those guys watch baseball, that they see it through that prism. Like they'll see a pitcher and they'll be like, that reminds me of my teammate, blah, blah, blah. Like, or they'll see, a guy, I don't know, hit an Apple homer and be like, man, I hit that same pitch there the other game. Like that's how these guys think. And I think if you just sort of embraced that and you were just like, yeah, you guys are actually really close in talent. These guys just do these couple things better than you. I think it would be a real kick in the ass in a good way.
Yeah, that's well said. That's the whole point of this to begin with. So
yep.
I'm going to take this as an opportunity to have my my daily comment about Giovanni Cruz, because it seems like I mentioned Giovanni Cruz for a reliever that hasn't made it to the upper levels of the minors. I talk about Giovanni Cruz so much, man. And I'm cheating a little bit with him, because I'm going to pair him up with Jeremiah Estrada, who is also a prospect still technically. He made his big league debut. He may or may not make the big league team out of camp this year. There's kind of a crunch here, and he still has options. So we might see Estrada in AAA. But I think that these 2 fit well together. And my main reason why I focused on this is because we saw Jeremiah Estrada as a starting pitcher after he got drafted. And after he got drafted, he ran into all sorts of injury problems, right? He was out for several years with injuries, and when he came back, he was this lights-out reliever.
Yep.
We've seen a similar path, except for the lights-out reliever part. We've seen a similar path with Giovanni Cruz, where he was a starting pitcher. We saw him in Eugene as a starting pitcher, TBT to the Eugene days. I miss Eugene, man. We saw him in Eugene as a starting pitcher, and then really he suffered with injuries for several years. And so we kind of saw a similar repertoire in terms of featuring a fastball. The fastballs are different, though. Jeremiah Estrada has a 4-seam riding fastball. Giovanni Cruz has a sinking fastball that's nasty. But they both have sliders, and pretty damn good sliders, too. Yeah. So I think that was the whole idea with this pairing of Estrada and Giovanni Cruz, is just that their paths have been very similar. And this, more than any of the others, is a matter of like taking to that mentality. Giovanni Cruz finding out firsthand from Jeremiah Estrada, how do I change my mentality coming back from injury, and now I'm a reliever, and how do I dominate in that role? That's just I'd be curious to hear those conversations.
I mean, the Cubs should be, throwing Jeremiah Estrada into everybody's face to remind you, like, this guy started last year in high A and was a big leaguer at the end of the year, and is like in the big league plans going forward. Like, wherever you are in this system, you are like a hot streak away. Like, you are like, you get better as a player and you sustain that over a couple months, the major leagues is right there for you. And, I think he's just like the perfect reminder for everybody, because probably everyone in the system almost has been a teammate of his.
Yeah. Actually, I hadn't thought about that. That's a good point. That he's been teammates with everybody.
Yeah.
All right. We both have Seiya Suzuki partnerships here. I'll let you lead off with yours.
Yeah, I mean, I think the talk with Seiya this spring is how jacked he is, right? As he's the guy just came to camp, just, obviously put on a bunch of muscle this offseason, just looks, just like an absolute incredible Hulk out there. So I know with both our picks, it got us thinking about, right-handed, extremely jacked outfielders. So the one that came to mind for me is Christian Franklin. Christian Franklin is that guy I think that a lot of people have forgotten about because he didn't play last year. He got injured in the first spring training game, missed the year. But a guy with a storied SEC career that I think will go to high A this year, and probably won't miss a beat. And I think Seiya and him there's some similarities there. I mean, body types they're almost exact. They're the same height. I think their weights listed as really close. They're both sort of like that barrel-chested type of build. And then they're similar hitters where I think if you had to criticize either of them, it would be that they don't swing enough, that sometimes they can get too late in counts and then get themselves sort of playing from behind. But when they hit the ball, I mean, they both just absolutely club the ball. And Seiya's a guy that, when you grow up in Japan and you learn the way they teach baseball over there, there's so many guys who are good contact hitters. Seiya, I think, struck out a lot more than a lot of his peers, but sort of figured out a way to become one of the best players there, regardless of the above average strikeout rate. And I think that skill, if Christian can get that, then, he's going to figure it out.
Yeah, I think that's a I'll go right into mine because I think that these both our pairings with Seiya are so similar. When you're thinking of strong guys in the system, I think of Jordan Wogu. And I think that, the strongest guy. And I think that my pairing of Suzuki and Wogu is I liked it because I think that. So actually, I'll take it back a little bit. A couple weeks ago, I had someone I just had people asking me prospect questions on Twitter, and I think it was Davey Baseball tweeted at me asking about a peak level of performer for Jordan Wogu, and I said that I sat there and thought about it for a minute, and he was kind of tough to comp. And I was like, you know what? I think that if Jordan Wogu was Seiya Suzuki in the big leagues, I think like that would be amazing. That'd be terrific. And I think that I can see those comparisons a little bit too, with the strikeout rate being higher than you'd like, but also not as high as I think.
Yeah,
I'm trying to higher than you'd like, but not as high as you'd expect. I get from the way they swing, the way they look. I guess.
Yeah.
And then also the way that they both have some speed. They both can play a decent outfield, but I'm kind of curious on where their home is in the outfield long term. I'm skeptical about Seiya in right field. I'm skeptical about Jordan Wogu still playing center field, but still doing it pretty well.
Yeah.
I think that there's a lot of comparisons there, and but it all comes back to really like the Christian Franklin, Jordan Wogu, Seiya Suzuki. They're all just jacked, and I love to see how they use that in game action.
Yeah, I like it. Yeah, I mean, put them both with Seiya for a couple days, and everybody's gonna have a good time.
Yeah, I think that exactly. I think that in his short amount of time, I think Seiya has become a guy that teammates love to be around. So why not put two guys with him? That's great. All right, as I'm looking through these comparisons on our note sheet, as I'm looking through these, I can all the Big Brother combinations that you have. I can kind of I knew where you're going to go with them before you started talking about them here, except for this one. I'm curious on this one that you have. I'm not quite getting it, so explain it to me.
Sure. So I wanted someone for Adrian Sampson because Adrian Sampson to me is like it's one of those really good baseball stories of a guy that a guy that's gone through everything, a guy that had to go overseas to play, a guy that, tasted the big leagues and then had to go to the minor leagues again for a year. His career is defined by getting beat down and then coming out the other side of it better. And so I wanted to find someone to pair with him. And so when I do it, I always go somewhat to body type and to sort of pitch mix. It's just sort of natural with how I think about baseball. So, I was like, okay, 6'2" righty in the system that gets good movement on his pitches, that's had some adversity so far. And the name that I went with is Cohen Moreno. Cohen Moreno was the 5th round pick by the Cubs in 2020. Did not, I'm trying to think, missed 2021. I think it was with injury. Yeah, it was. And he played last year with Myrtle Beach. And I would say it didn't go particularly well. It also it went really under the radar. Like, I don't think anybody talks about Cohen Moreno anymore. But I actually think there were a lot of things that were really improved. He obviously done a ton of work to get stronger. He, came into the Cubs system as like a cross-country runner, body type even. Like, it just didn't look like a pitcher at all. Now he looks like a pitcher. His fastball probably had 5 more miles per hour than it used to, which is something that Adrian had to do. I mean, Adrian throws so much harder than he used to, even though he's not that guy that like screams, a jump and stuff guy. And last year, Cohen just didn't have any feel for his stuff. He just had not lived in his stuff long enough to sort of, I think, have any idea like what he had on a day-to-day basis. Like, sometimes he'd have a really good first inning and then he'd come out in the second inning and look like a completely different guy. And so, I think Adrian would be a really good example for him of like, hey, it's not always going to go well. The road is going to be like really challenging. But when you're that talented, if you just keep grinding and if you keep figuring out like, these are my core skills that work against hitters and I'm just going to jam it down their throats, Sampson is that guy that made it through the other side. So, I root for that for Cohen. So I thought of them.
Yeah, that went from being the one I didn't understand to being maybe the one I like the most. So I like that a whole lot. Cohen was, I think that he went from being a kid that had like looked like a baby giraffe, right? Where he was so long and lanky, to he kind of pitched like a baby giraffe, right? Where what you could tell he wasn't quite comfortable in his new body, right? Yeah, that's good. That's a good one, dude. I like that one a lot. Where it's like they're different situations entirely, but it's one of those things where if Cohen can see Adrian Sampson and be like, you know what, like if he did this, I can bounce back from a rough half season in Myrtle Beach. Right. That's nothing. So I liked it a lot. All right, I'm gonna go from Adrian's. It might not get much more different than this. But I'm gonna go. We're gonna finish with
a bang.
Yeah, end with a couple of first round picks. Dansby Swanson with Ed Howard, and I know that I'm gonna talk about this, and I'm gonna give you some time to talk about it too, because these guys were on your short list too. But the comparisons and the reason why Adrian Sampson and Cohen Moreno, I didn't understand it. This seems pretty self-explanatory, right? 2 first-round picks, both shortstops, both defensive wizards when they were drafted, and still we'll see with Ed and how he bounces back from injury. But like that's their go-to is how silky smooth they are on defense. And then both guys that swing and miss quite a bit at their levels. And so I think with Dansby and Silk, I would want to see a conversation where, like you mentioned, Tucker Barnhart and Casey Opitz. It's like, all right, Casey, like you just got to hit enough. Here is how you hit enough to be me at the big leagues. It's one of those things where like Dansby can talk to Ed Howard about, all right, like I still swing and miss enough, but I can still, or I still swing and miss quite a bit, but I can still be successful with the bat because I do X, Y, and Z. You know what I mean? And I think that would be a good conversation for those two to have. But also, man, like we've talked all spring training about like watching Dansby and Nico work defensively up the middle, but like watching Dansby and Ed Howard would also be super, super fun. We saw Ed Howard while we're on this topic here. I want to point out that we saw some video. I think Scotty Shagnon posted some video of Ed Howard taking ground balls in spring training, and then our guy Rich Biesterfeld took a video or some pictures of Ed Howard taking some batting practice. So it was good to see him out and doing baseball things.
looks awesome. I mean, the footwork in the video already looks like, you know, he just, I mean, the guy was born to play shortstop.
Yes. Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I think that's why it's such a good mix of these two. I mean, even like the thing you didn't mention that really sticks out to me is like their personalities seem so similar to me. I mean, these guys are quiet killers, right? I mean, they are guys that aren't the loudest voices in the room, but like when their teammates ask on who a leader is, they pick them, not because of like they're talking, but because like the way they conduct themselves is just like, I'm the best player here, even if I'm not the best player here, you know. And it's not like an ego cocky thing. It's just like I don't know. It's just there's sort of this aura around those two guys, I think. And you know, I think that's something that's like sort of built into just like true shortstops, or just guys that they just belong.
Yeah, they are shortstops through and through. Like that, I think that's
Yeah.
spot on, right? Like that, like I think that shortstop is shortstop is like a quarterback in football, right? But both because they're the leader of the infield, all that good stuff. But like because of like all shortstops' personalities are like that. You know what I mean? Well,
Yep.
all the good shortstops' personalities are like that, and so
When you have the shortstops
yeah.
that are, you know, there's the shortstops like Javi, who is like, you know, Javi hasn't walked onto a baseball field his whole life and been like, I'm the best player here. Like he's thought that every single day.
Yeah.
Dansby and Ed are a little different than that, where they're just like, they're just comfortable, you know, they're just like, you know, I'm where I'm supposed to be.
But both the cool guy on the field for
Yep.
different reasons. Javi and Ed and Dansby, right?
Totally. Totally.
Yeah, that's cool. All right, man. I think we've run through all 8. I hope fans out there like this. You got anything else to add before we wrap up the show?
No, I don't think so.
All right, man. Yeah, like I said, I'd love to hear listener your perspective, your ideas on combinations that we can put together. Be sure to you can comment on the YouTube here. You can comment your answers here on the Apple or Spotify and all that good stuff. But YouTube is probably the better place for that. But you can also tweet at both of us and let us know who you think might pair well together as a big brother, little brother type of situation. Bryan, you want to plug yourself? Anything that you're working on right now over at Bleacher Nation?
Sure, yeah. I'm at Cub Prospects on Twitter and at Bleacher Nation. I am, let's see, how many days are we? We are 19 days away from heading to Arizona for the kids' spring break, which I'll be there for 9 or 10 days, probably get to the Cubs backfields 4 or 5 days. So, you know, I cannot wait to be there. And, you know, I'll come back to this podcast when Greg's done with talking to all the broadcasters, and I will have, you know, as many nuggets as I can remember, just with obscure Cubs prospects doing like very small things, you know, in like drills every day and taking way too much meaning from it.
I love who were your guys? I'm trying to remember like a couple of guys you walked away from the backfield last year with that, like the kind of obscure guys.
Yeah, the one I always think of is like Manny Rodriguez before he broke out was a guy like I saw an inning of his that really popped and I wrote about it, and then he had that breakout season. Jake Reindl last year was a guy that really popped out in spring training. There's a really big example too that I can't think of, but I mean, like even like the backfields are so great. Like you go there last year and you see Mervis take batting practice, like you're notice it, and then to see what he does, like it's so fun when those sort of follow throughs happen, and they really do happen because like the guys that are going to have breakout seasons like put in the work this winter, and like they show it on the fields. Like it really does sort of translate that quickly.
Yeah, that's so fun. I will be getting out there at some point down the line. I will not be there this year, so I'm excited to hear what you have to say on this show once you come back from that spring training trip. You can find him at Cub Prospects. You can find me on Twitter at Out of the Vines. I have nothing really in the hopper right now. I think that over at Northside Bound, you can go back if you have not read my stuff on Bash, on the new offensive metrics that I put out there. I don't know if we got the chance to talk much about that recently, but go check those out. I have the kind of introductory to Bash, and then I also have the kind of follow up of guys that I took away, the James Triantoses and the Matt Mervis and Alex Canarios of the world. So go check those out. But you can find this podcast anywhere where you listen to podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Google, iHeartRadio, all that good stuff. And you can also find it here on the Northsidebound YouTube page and over at northsidebound.com. So thank you guys so much. We will be back in one short week because we're going to the weekly schedule. So super excited for that. And thank you guys so much for listening.